Cornfields have always held an unsettling mystery. Maybe it's the way they stretch on endlessly, with rows tall enough to swallow a person whole. Or perhaps it's the sense that something is lurking just beyond your sight, hidden among the stalks. Over the years, many have whispered of strange occurrences in these fields. Shadowy figures, eerie sounds, and the feeling of being watched. Tonight, I'll take you deep into the heart of these forgotten places, with 3 terrifying tales. Each of these people thought they were safe, that their nights would end like any other. But they didn't realize they were walking into the unknown, into the realm of Mr. Scary Guy. Prepare yourself for a journey beyond the ordinary, into the shadows of your deepest fears. Welcome to the world of Mr. Scary Guy. I'd always hated corn mazes. It wasn't the idea of getting lost that bothered me. It was what could be hiding in the rows. But when my best friend Jake suggested we take a late-night trip to one after the county fair, I didn't want to seem like a coward in front of our group. It was a Friday night, and there were 4 of us. Jake, his girlfriend, Katie, our friend Lisa, and me. We had been driving back from the fair, stuffed with fried food, when Jake spotted the old sign for Harrow's Haunted Corn Maze. He grinned that mischievous smile of his and said,
"Let's check it out."
I protested, saying it was too late and the maze had probably closed hours ago, but Jake didn't listen. He swung the car down the gravel road that led to the maze, the headlights bouncing as we passed the closed sign at the entrance. The cornfield was eerily quiet, the rows of towering stalks casting long shadows in the moonlight. The place felt deserted, but Jake was determined. He hopped out of the car and dared us to follow him. I hesitated, but eventually got out, not wanting to be left behind. The others followed suit. At first, it was kind of fun. We joked about who would get lost first and tried to scare each other. But as we got deeper into the maze, the mood shifted. The laughter faded, and a thick fog rolled in from nowhere. It clung to the corn like it was alive, making it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. The moonlight barely penetrated the haze. I heard it first, a soft whisper carried on the wind. "Turn back," it seemed to say. I spun around, expecting to see one of the others playing a trick, but they were all ahead of me, walking silently. My skin crawled. "Did you guys hear that?" I asked, my voice sounding too loud in the thick silence.
"Hear what?"
Katie replied, not bothering to turn around. I didn't answer, but I stayed close behind them, my heart beginning to race. We walked in silence for a few more minutes when I heard the whisper again, clearer this time.
"Turn back, or never leave."
I stopped cold, the hairs on my arms standing up. I looked around, trying to pinpoint the source of the voice, but it seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. The fog swirled thicker, and the cornfield seemed to close in around us. "Guys, I think we should head back," I said, trying to keep the panic out of my voice. Jake turned around with a smirk.
"Scared already, man? Come on, we've barely started."
But I wasn't joking, and I could see Lisa wasn't either. She had gone pale and was clutching Katie's arm tightly.
"Something's not right.
She whispered.
I don't like this."
Before Jake could answer, we all heard it, a rustling sound coming from the corn. It wasn't the wind. It was the sound of footsteps, slow and deliberate, moving parallel to us in the stalks.
"Who's there?"
Jake called out, his voice a little less cocky now. No answer, just more rustling.
"The fog seemed to pulse with each step. Maybe it's just the wind."
Lisa said, but I could hear the fear in her voice. The footsteps stopped. Everything went silent, too silent. Even the crickets had stopped chirping. We stood there frozen, waiting for something to happen. Then, without warning, the rustling started again, but this time it was faster, moving toward us.
"Run!"
Jake shouted. We sprinted, blindly crashing through the maze, the corn cutting at our arms and faces. I could hear Katie screaming ahead of me, but the fog was so thick I could barely see her. The footsteps were right behind us, gaining. My heart pounded as I stumbled, hitting the dirt hard. When I looked up, the others were gone, swallowed by the fog and the endless rows of corn. I scrambled to my feet, disoriented and alone. The footsteps stopped again, and for a moment, all I could hear was my own ragged breathing. Then, a whisper, so close it felt like it was in my ear.
You can't escape.
I turned, and through the fog, I saw it. A shadowy figure standing just beyond the corn, its eyes glowing faintly in the dark. It didn't move, but I could feel its gaze piercing through me, cold and malicious. I bolted, running in the opposite direction, not caring where I ended up, as long as it was away from that thing. The fog twisted around me, the corn seeming to shift and rearrange itself. I had no idea where I was going. After what felt like hours of running, I burst out of the maze and into the parking lot, gasping for breath. The others were already there, huddled by the car, pale and shaking. "We need to leave. Now," I gasped. Without another word, Jake jumped into the driver's seat, and we sped out of there, the maze shrinking behind us in the rearview mirror. None of us spoke the entire drive home. We never talked about what we saw that night. We didn't need to. But I know one thing for sure. I will never step foot in a corn maze again. I bought the farm to escape. After years of living in the city, the noise, the chaos, and the constant pressure had gotten to me. I wanted peace, solitude, a place where I could be alone with my thoughts. The farm, nestled in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by cornfields as far as the eye could see, seemed perfect. The house was old, but sturdy. The fields were vast, golden rows of corn stretching toward the horizon. It was quiet, just the sound of the wind rustling the stalks. For the first few weeks, it was everything I had hoped for. The isolation was comforting. But then, things started to change. It began with small things. At night, I would hear rustling in the fields, louder than the wind. It sounded like something or someone moving through the corn. At first I told myself it was animals, raccoons or deer, probably. But the noises became more distinct. Footsteps, slow and deliberate, as if someone was pacing just out of sight. I never saw anyone, but the feeling of being watched was constant, especially at night. I started keeping the blinds drawn, but that didn't stop the sensation. It felt like eyes were on me, even inside the house. One night, I woke up to the sound of tapping on my bedroom window. I live alone, miles from anyone else. My heart raced as I sat up, staring at the window, too terrified to move. The tapping continued, rhythmic, insistent. I finally gathered the courage to get out of bed and look. There was nothing there, just darkness and the faint outline of the corn swaying in the wind. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I tried to convince myself it was my imagination, but deep down, I knew something was wrong. I had heard stories growing up, legends about spirits that roamed the cornfields, watching, waiting for trespassers. I had never believed in that stuff before. But now, I wasn't so sure. A week later, I decided to walk the fields at dusk, just to clear my head. As the sun set, casting long shadows over the corn, the air grew cold. Too cold for a summer evening. The rustling began again, but this time it was different. It wasn't random, it was purposeful. I stopped, standing in the middle of the field, surrounded by rows of corn. The rustling grew louder, closer, circling me. I turned, trying to catch a glimpse of whatever was out there, but there was nothing, just the endless sea of corn. "Who's there?" I called, my voice shaking. The rustling stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. And then, a whisper.
Leave.
I froze, my blood turning to ice. The voice was right behind me, but when I turned, there was no one there. I ran. I didn't stop until I was back at the house, slamming the door behind me. I locked it, then every other door and window, my heart racing in my chest. I stood in the middle of the living room, waiting, listening. For a while, there was nothing. Just the wind. And then, the tapping started again. This time, it was on every window, all at once. Tap, tap, tap. The sound echoed through the house, relentless. I grabbed a flashlight and rushed to the front door, flinging it open and shining the light across the fields. I expected to see something, anything, but there was only the corn, standing tall and still in the night. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it. Something was out there, watching me, waiting. The next day I called the local authorities, but they found nothing. No tracks, no signs of anyone being on the property. They chalked it up to animals or the wind, but I knew better. I decided to sell the farm. Whatever was out there, I wasn't going to stick around and find out. The night before I left, the tapping returned. This time, it wasn't just on the windows. It was on the walls, the doors, even the roof. It felt like the entire house was surrounded. And then I heard the whisper again, louder this time.
You can't leave.
I ran. I didn't pack. I didn't look back. I just got in my car and drove, leaving the farm, the cornfields, and whatever was out there behind. But even now, miles away, I can still feel them. The watchers. They don't need the corn to find you. It was supposed to be a simple road trip. My girlfriend, Emily, and I had been planning it for weeks. Just a scenic drive through the heartland, stopping at small towns along the way. We wanted to get away from the city, find some peace and quiet, and experience the rural charm of the Midwest. We were 2 days into our trip when things started to go wrong. It was getting late, the sun dipping low in the sky, casting long shadows across the fields as we drove along an empty 2-lane highway. Cornfields stretched on either side, an endless sea of green and gold. There were no houses, no other cars, just miles and miles of nothing.
We should find a place to stop for the night,
Emily said, glancing at the map on her phone. There's a small town about 20 miles ahead. Perfect, I replied, relieved. The drive had been beautiful, but the isolation was starting to get to me. It felt like we were the only 2 people left in the world. As the last light of day faded, a thick fog rolled in. It was sudden, swallowing up the road and the fields around us. I slowed the car to a crawl, squinting to see the yellow lines ahead.
Where did this fog come from?
Emily asked, her voice tinged with nervousness. I don't know, I said, gripping the steering wheel tighter. But I don't like it. We continued driving slowly, the fog growing thicker with every mile. The cornfields on either side became ghostly shapes in the mist, their towering stalks barely visible. The air felt heavy, oppressive. Then the car sputtered. Come on, I muttered, pressing the gas. The engine stuttered again, then died completely. We coasted to a stop on the side of the road. You've got to be kidding me, I groaned, banging the steering wheel in frustration.
Now?
Emily checked her phone, but there was no signal. Great, we're stuck in the middle of nowhere with no reception. I popped the hood and stepped out of the car, the cool night air immediately sending a chill down my spine. The fog was even thicker outside, clinging to everything like a living thing. I fiddled with the engine for a few minutes, but I wasn't much of a mechanic. Nothing I did seemed to help. I'll try to flag down someone, I said, glancing down the empty road, though I hadn't seen a car in over an hour. Emily stayed in the car while I stood by the roadside, waving my flashlight in the mist, hoping for a passing vehicle. But there was nothing, just the silence of the night and the distant rustle of corn swaying in the breeze. At least, that's what I thought it was at first. But as I stood there, the rustling grew louder, more deliberate. I turned toward the field, shining my flashlight into the rows of corn. The light barely penetrated the fog, but I could see the tops of the stalks moving, as if something or someone was moving through them. Emily, I called, my voice tight with fear. I think there's something out there. She rolled down the window, her face pale.
What do you mean?
Before I could answer, the rustling stopped. The night fell into a heavy, unnatural silence. The kind that presses in on your ears and makes your heart race. Then I saw it. A figure, just at the edge of the cornfield, barely visible in the fog, tall, impossibly tall, with long, thin limbs. It stood completely still, watching me. I froze, my mouth going dry. Emily, get out of the car.
Why?
She asked, confused. Just get out, I said, unable to tear my eyes away from the figure. It hadn't moved, but I could feel its gaze on me, cold and hostile. Emily stepped out of the car, and when she looked toward the cornfield, she gasped.
What is that?
I don't know, I whispered, but we need to go. Now. We backed away from the car, keeping our eyes on the figure. As we moved, it took a step forward, its long limbs moving with an unnatural grace. Then another step, and another. Suddenly, there was more movement in the corn. Dozens of figures, just like the first one, emerged from the field, all moving toward us in eerie, synchronized steps. Run! I shouted, grabbing Emily's hand. We bolted down the road, the fog swirling around us. The sound of footsteps, heavy rhythmic, echoed behind us, growing louder as the figures gained speed. My heart pounded in my chest, panic clawing at my mind. I glanced back and my stomach dropped. They were faster than us, their long limbs covering the ground effortlessly. I didn't know where we were running. There was no town, no lights, just the endless fog and the narrow strip of road cutting through the fields. But we had no choice. We ran until our lungs burned and our legs screamed in protest. Then, up ahead, a faint light pierced the fog. A house. There, I gasped. Run for it! We sprinted toward the light, the footsteps behind us growing louder, closer. I could almost feel the figure's cold presence right behind me. We reached the house, a small, run-down farmhouse at the edge of the field. I slammed into the front door, pounding on it with both fists. Help! Let us in! I shouted. There was no answer. The footsteps stopped. I turned and saw them, just a few yards away now, the figures standing motionless in the fog, watching us with empty eyes. Emily screamed. The door creaked open, and an old man stood there, his face lined with age and fear.
Get inside! Now!
We didn't need to be told twice. We stumbled into the house, and the man slammed the door shut behind us, bolting it tight. I pressed my back against the door, breathing hard. What are those things? Emily stammered, shaking uncontrollably. The old man's face was grim.
They're the stalkers. They come from the corn, looking for lost souls to take back with them.
I stared at him, trying to process what he was saying. What do they want? He shook his head.
No one knows for sure, but once they've marked you, they won't stop until they have you.
A chill ran down my spine. Marked? How do we stop them? The man didn't answer. He just looked out the window, his eyes filled with a sadness I couldn't comprehend. We stayed in that farmhouse for the rest of the night, huddled together in fear. Outside, the stalkers stood motionless, watching the house, waiting. They didn't try to break in. They didn't make a sound. They just stood there, silently. By morning, the fog had lifted and the figures were gone. The old man told us to leave, to never come back. We didn't argue. We drove away from that place as fast as we could, but the feeling of being watched never left. Even now, I can still feel their eyes on me. They're out there somewhere, in the fields, and I know one day they'll come for me. Tonight, we've seen how the ordinary can turn into the terrifying. Cornfields, those quiet and unassuming rows of crops, hide more than just secrets. They hide nightmares waiting to emerge. Whether it's a simple trip into a maze, a peaceful life on a farm, or an innocent road trip through rural America, the unknown can find you when you least expect it. So the next time you pass by a field of corn, think twice about what might be hiding among the stalks. And remember, if you ever hear footsteps behind you or see figures watching from the field, don't stop. Keep moving before it's too late. This is Mr. Scary Guy, reminding you to sleep well, if you dare. Thanks for watching till the end. If you enjoyed the video, make sure to subscribe by clicking the icon above. We've also got a playlist full of scary stories on your left side, and a suggested video you'll love on the right. Choose one and keep the scares going.